The sound reached me before anything else did. Not the wind. I knew the wind in that canyon the way I knew my own breathing. Not a hawk. Not rock giving way above the snow line. Something heavier. Something that had no business being at the bottom of Broken Jaw Creek in the hour before. Full dark. I had come down for water. My horse needed it, and so did I, and the spring up at the camp had gone to mud the day before. I carried 2 skins across my shoulder, and I was thinking about nothing except the cold, the way the cold was sitting in the back of my jaw, the way it does in the 4th month of winter, when even the stones are tired of it. That is what I was thinking about. Not what I would find. She was half in the water, and half on the gravel bar, face down, one arm twisted under her at a bad angle. Coat was torn open at the back. Not by thorns, not by rock. Torn like something had hold of it and let go hard. The gravel around her was disturbed in a long gouge from upstream where she'd slid to a stop. Her hat was gone. Hair was loose and dark with creek water. And there was blood running from somewhere above her ear, going pink where it met the current. I stood there a moment. My hand was on the water skin and I did not move. A white woman, here, in this canyon, in this cold, which meant she had an hour. Maybe 2. Before the cold finished whatever falling had started. I put down the water skins and I went to her. Pulse was in her throat, thin but there. I rolled her to her back and her face was young. Not a girl but not old, maybe 30, maybe a few years past. And her cheekbone was already swelling, and her lips were gray. My palm flat on her sternum, and I could feel her chest move. Shallow but moving, I have pulled men from rivers. I have packed wounds tight with moss and pine pitch, and prayed over men who didn't make it, and a few who did. I knew what to do with a body that was still alive, and I did it without standing there thinking about it. I got her off the gravel and onto higher ground, and I got her coat off, and wrung the water out of it and put it back on her. And then I took off my own outer robe, the elk hide one, the one my mother had made for me the winter before she died, and I wrapped it over her. Then I went back for the water skins because my horse still needed water. And you do not abandon the thing you came to do. I filled both skins. Then I went back to her and I built a fire against the canyon wall where the rock would hold the heat and reflect it back. And I sat close enough to the fire that she would get the warmth. And I looked at her face in the firelight, and I tried to work out what had happened. 2. A white woman in a torn coat at the bottom of Broken Jaw Creek, with a wound on her head that had not come from the fall alone. The railroad ran the ridge above the canyon. 300 feet, maybe a little more, straight up. The gravel gouge was too long and too regular for a slide. The coat was torn at the back and not the front. The wound on her head was on the left side, above the ear, and it was not a scrape wound. It was a strike wound, flat and deliberate. I sat with that for a while. I am Chayton, chief of the Broken Bow Band, which is what we called ourselves, because a man named Mato Luta, Red Bear, my grandfather's grandfather, had carried a cracked bow into a fight with the Crow and come home alive, and we never let him forget it. I had been chief for 11 years, since my father died of a chest sickness that the agency doctor said he could not treat. I was 44 years old. I had a son who was grown and riding with the northern bands, and a daughter who had married a man from Standing Rock. My wife Winona had been dead for 2 winters. The grief of that was not something I talked about, and most of my people knew not to talk about it, either. I tell you this because you need to know who I was before I say what I did next. What I did next was stay. I stayed through the night, fed the fire. I put snow on a fold of leather and held it against the swelling on her cheekbone, and when she shivered, I moved the fire closer, and when she moaned, twice, sharp without waking, I stayed still and did not put my hand on her because she did not know me and would not have wanted that. I gave her no medicine because I did not know what was broken inside, and medicine given wrong is worse than no medicine. I watched the color in her lips, and when it shifted from gray to pale, then from pale to something more like living, I allowed myself to believe she would make it to morning. Around midnight she woke, eyes opened, And she saw the fire first, and then the canyon wall, and then me. And she did not scream. She went rigid. Every muscle in her locked up all at once. And her hand found a stone near her, sighed and closed around it. And she held it. I did not move. I held her eyes and I said, in English, "You are alive, you are warm, I am not going to hurt you." My English was not perfect. It was good enough. I had learned it from a man named Samuel Birch who had run a trading post near the agency for 15 years, and who had, reasons that were his own, spent considerable time teaching me, he said. A chief who could not speak the language of the men who were coming was a blind man in a room full of moving furniture. He was not wrong. She stared at me. Her grip on the stone did not loosen. "Your arm," I said. "Left arm. I think it is not broken, but it is badly hurt. Do not try to use it." She looked down at her left arm, then back at me. "Who are you?" she said. "Chayton. My people camp above on the East Ridge. I came for water and I found you. How long have I? 5-6 hours. The sun is gone. Shh. It is past middle of night." She was still holding the stone. I noticed she had not asked where she was or what had happened to her. She knew what had happened to her. She was trying to work out where she stood now. "I need to get to a town," she said. "In the morning. Tonight you cannot walk, and I will not travel this canyon in the dark. There are 2 places where the wall comes down, and if you miss them, you go off. A ledge." She looked at the fire, then at the elk hide robe wrapped around her, then at me. "That's yours," she said. "Yes. You're cold. I am fine. I was cold, not dangerously, but the night had teeth in it. She could see that. She pushed the robe toward me, not at me, just toward the middle of the space between us, and said, 'There's enough.' I looked at the robe, then at her. 'I am not going to hurt you,' I said again. 'I heard you the first time,' she said. 'Come closer to the fire. I don't want to be responsible for a man dying of cold who just spent the night keeping me alive.' I moved closer. We sat on opposite sides of the fire for a while, with the robe across both our laps, a careful distance between us, and neither of us spoke. And the fire did what fire does, and the canyon settled into the particular quiet that canyons find past midnight. Her name was Clara Marsh. She told me that after a while, not because I asked, but because she seemed to decide I had earned it. She was from a town in Missouri, she said, a place I had heard of but never seen. She had been on the train for 2 days. There were men on the train who had wanted something she had. Papers, she said, land papers, a deed to a parcel near the new rail line that her husband had left her when he died. And when she had refused to give them, the papers, they had waited until the train crossed the canyon, and then they had taken the papers anyway and thrown her off the back of the last car. She said all of this evenly, not flat. She was not a flat woman, but steady. A person speaks when they have already spent shock of a thing and are now just living inside the fact of it. Husband had been dead 8 months. I noted that and said nothing about it. "The papers," I said. "You had them on you?" "In my coat lining. They found them. So they have what they wanted." "Yes." "Then the men on the train, do they believe you are dead?" She was quiet for a moment. "They would have to, wouldn't they? From that height?" "Then perhaps that is useful," I said. She looked at me. "Useful how? If they believe you are dead, they are not looking for you. You have time to get to a lawyer, to a judge, before they do anything with the papers. Land papers must be recorded. That takes time. If you move faster than they expect." She was already nodding slowly. "I have a cousin in Cheyenne. He's a solicitor. If I could get there. Cheyenne is 4 days' ride from here. 2. If the weather holds and you can keep a horse." "Can I keep a horse? Can you ride?" "I grew up on a farm in Missouri." I almost smiled at that. Almost. "Then yes, you can keep a horse." Tst. We talked until the sky went from black to gray, and then from gray to that particular blue that comes before the sun. I do not know exactly how it happened that we talked so long. I was not by nature a man who talked a great deal. Shh. My counsel complained about this sometimes, that I would sit in a meeting and listen for an hour and then say 4 words and stand up. And somehow the 4 words would be the decision, and everyone would leave knowing what we were doing, They would have liked more words, and I never had more to give. My wife Winona had called me a stone with eyes. She said it fondly. I think Clara Marsh was not a woman who needed to fill silence, which helped. When we talked, it was because there was something to say. When there was not, we watched the fire. She asked me, sometime in that blue hour, how I had come to speak English as well as I did. And I told her about Samuel Birch and the trading post and the theory of the blind man in the moving furniture room. She thought about that for a moment and said, he wasn't wrong. And I said, no, he wasn't. And that was the end of that. I went up to the camp just after first light. I told my cousin Dakota what I had found, and he gave me the look he always gives me when I am about to do something the council will have opinions about, which is a look that involves his left eyebrow going up about a half an inch and staying there. I told him to saddle the gray mare. She was the smoothest horse I had and the easiest on a rider who was hurt, and to put together enough food for a 5-day ride. You're taking her yourself, Dakota said. Yes, the eyebrow. The men who threw her off that train think she is dead, I said. If she arrives in Cheyenne alone, a white woman out of the canyon, word will travel. I need to get her there quietly. There are other ways to do quietly that don't involve the chief riding 4 days to Cheyenne. I know. The council can wait 4 days. Dakota looked at me for a long moment, and then he went to saddle the gray mare. He knew me well enough to know that when I was done talking, I was done, and I was done. I went back down to the canyon. Clara Marsh had used the time alone to wash her face in the creek and repin her hair as best she could, and she was standing when I came back, testing her left arm, rotating it carefully, making a face. She had found her footing again. You could see it in the way she was standing. How bad? I said, nodding at the arm. Bad enough. Not broken. She looked at the gray mare. She's beautiful. She is steady. That is what matters today. Getting her into the saddle with one arm badly wrenched took 2 tries and a technique we worked out together, involving a boulder and a very specific sequence of movements that she directed and I executed without comment. When she was up, she sat straight and gathered the reins in her right hand, and her left hand rested on her thigh, and she looked like she had been on a horse her whole life, which, given what she'd said about Missouri, she probably had. I mounted my own horse and we went up the back, way out of the canyon, the long switchback that comes out 2 miles east of where the train track crosses the ridge, and I did not look up at that track, and neither did she. But I noticed she did not look away from it either. She looked right at it. The place where the railing ended and the canyon began. She looked at it for a solid 10 seconds, and then she looked forward, and we rode. The first day we made good time. The weather was cold but clear, the kind of high plains cold that has no wind in it, just weight, and the horses moved well on the frozen ground. We did not talk much. I watched the ridgelines the way I always watch ridgelines, and I watched the way she rode, and I adjusted our pace to what her shoulder could bear, without her having to ask me to. She noticed that. In the afternoon when we stopped to water the horses at a creek that was mostly ice with a thin current running under it, she said, "You've been slowing down every time I shift in the saddle." Yes, I didn't ask you to. No. She looked at me. Thank you, she said. That was all. We rode on. We camped that night on the south face of a long ridge where the rock broke the wind, and there was enough dead wood for a fire. I built it, and she watched how I built it, and when I went to get more wood, she built it up higher the way I had built it. Not her own way, mine, because mine was working, and she was a practical woman. I noticed that. We ate dried meat and hardtack that Dakota had packed. Clara ate everything I gave her without comment, and did not pretend she wasn't hungry, which I respected. A person who pretends not to need what they need is trouble on a long ride. Can I ask you something? She said after a while. Yes. Why are you doing this? Taking me yourself. You're the chief. You have. She paused. You have things to do that aren't escorting a stranger to Cheyenne. I thought about the answer. I had several, and I did not want to give her the wrong one. The men who threw you off that train, I said. They own land that was, before the railroad came, land that was ours. The line that runs that ridge. It goes through the middle of ground where my father's father hunted. I know who those men are. Not their names, but I know what they are. Men who take what they want and throw away what is in their way. I looked at the fire. I have been thrown away before, not from a train, but I know the motion. She was quiet for a long time. I'm sorry, she said. Don't be sorry. Just get to Cheyenne and give your cousin enough information to cause them trouble. I intend to. Good. The second day her shoulder was worse, which was expected. The second day's is always worse than the first with that kind of injury. And she did not mention it, and I did not mention it except to change our pace to a walk. For the last 3 hours of the afternoon. She did not protest. She understood trail logic. What I remember about the second day is the light. We came through a stretch of open country where the grass was dead and pale, and the sky was doing something with the afternoon clouds that made everything gold and gray at the same time. And she pulled up her horse for a moment just to look at it, just for a moment, and her face was turned away from me, and the light was on her, and I looked at her longer than I should have. I had not looked at a woman that way since Winona. I put my eyes on the trail, and we rode on. That night she asked me about my people. Not in the way that white people sometimes ask, with the particular kind of careful curiosity that is really just polite staring, but directly, the way she asked everything. What did we do in winter? How large was the band? Where had we been before the reservation boundaries came? I told her. More than I usually told anyone. I do not know why, except that she listened the way certain people listen, with her whole attention, without waiting for her turn to talk. And it had been a long time since someone had listened to me that way. My counsel listened to me with respect. That is different. I told her about the winter camps we used to make in the valley that was now fenced off by a cattle outfit from Texas. I told her about the summer hunt and what it had been when there were still enough buffalo to matter. I told her about my father and the chest sickness and the agency doctor and the 4 words I said at the council meeting, where we decided we were not going to fight and not going to beg and not going to leave. We were going to stay and we were going to find ways to survive inside a bad arrangement that was not going to get better and make it as dignified as we could. I had never said that last part out loud before. The decision itself, the 4 words, yes. But not the reasoning behind them, the full reasoning, not the part about dignity. She said, that's harder than fighting. I looked at her. Fighting is one thing, she said. It ends one way or another. What you're describing is something you have to do every day, and it never ends, and there's no moment where you get to say you won. That's harder. I sat with that for a while. Yes, I said, it is. She had a way of seeing things plainly that I was not prepared for and could not entirely account for. The third day in the early afternoon we had trouble. 4 men on the trail ahead. They were not railroad men. Their horses were rough stock, not the solid company horses the railroad crews rode. But they were not innocent either. I could tell by the way they spread across the trail when they saw us, not moving aside the way 2 riders would if they were just passing, spreading, filling the width of it. Clara saw it too. She did not make a sound, but I felt the change in her, the way a person goes still when they are afraid and are not going to show it. I put my hand up, stop, and she stopped. I rode forward alone. The man at the center was big, 40 or so, with a beard that had not been introduced to a pair of scissors in some time. He looked me over the way some men look. Measuring, tempestuous, deciding, and then he looked past me at Clara and I watched his eyes change. That's your woman, he said. Yes, I said. He smiled, not a good smile. Pretty, what are you 2 doing out this way? Riding, I said. Riding to where? Our business. He moved his horse forward a step. I'm making it mine. I want to be careful about how I tell this part. I am not a violent man by preference. I have fought when fighting was necessary, and I was good at it, which is not something I am proud of. It is just true. I had a rifle in the scabbard on my saddle and a knife on my belt, and I knew how to use both, and I was sitting on a horse I had ridden for 6 years, who would not spook at a gunshot if the sun was falling out of the sky. I am also the chief of the Broken Bow Band. I have sat across a table from government agents who wanted to reduce our land by half. I have negotiated in rooms where every man in the room had a reason to see me leave with less than I came with. I am not easily moved. I looked at the big man and I said, I know who sends men to ride this trail. Tell him that Chaitan sends his greetings and says the woman with me is no concern of his, and to keep his men off my land. The big man's eyes flickered. He had not expected me to know a name. I did not actually know a name, I guessed, based on the territory and the type of men. But the flicker told me I had guessed correctly. Nobody said anything about, he started. Tell him, I said. I held his eyes. I did not move my hand toward my rifle. I did not need to. What I had was something better. I had the absolute certainty he could see in my face and my stillness that I was not afraid of him, and that whatever happened next I was prepared for it, had already thought through it, had already decided. Men who rely on intimidation are undone by a man who cannot be intimidated. It is not courage. Exactly. It is just a thing you learn when you have been sitting across tables from powerful men your whole life. He held my eyes for another 10 seconds. Then he moved his horse off the trail. The other 3 followed. I rode back to Clara without looking behind me, and I said, We'll move at a canter until we clear this ridge. Yes, she said. Shh. And she did not ask me single questions about what had been said, and we rode hard for 40 minutes, until the ridge was behind us and the country opened up into the flat approach to the Cheyenne Basin. That evening, she said, the man you named, you bluffed him. Partly. You didn't know his employer's name. No. But I knew his type, and I knew his territory, and I made a reasonable guess. And if you'd guessed wrong, I had a rifle. She looked at me for a long moment. You've been doing that the whole trip, she said. Seeing things before I see them. The pace, the ridgelines, those men. I have been doing this kind of thing for a long time. I know. I'm not saying it like it's a criticism. She paused. I'm saying I noticed. That was the moment, I think. Not a grand moment. Not a declaration. Just her saying she had been paying attention to what I did, and she had seen it clearly, and she wanted me to know she had seen it. That was all. But it went in like a blade between ribs, clean and sudden. And I sat there in the firelight and felt something move in my chest that I had not felt. In 2 years, I looked at the fire. You should sleep, I said. Tomorrow is the last day. She slept. I did not sleep for a long time. Shh. Cheyenne, in those years, was a particular kind of ugly. The ugly of a place that had been built fast by people who intended to build it better later, and hadn't yet. The main street was mud when it rained, and dust when it didn't. The buildings were mostly raw lumber, the kind that warps and splits in the first hard winter. There was the hotel with a sign that had lost 2 of its letters, and there was a bank with an iron door that was the most solid thing in town. There was also, at the north end of the street, small office above a hardware store, with a shingle that said Marsh & Crane Solicitors. I rode in with her because she asked me to, and I had not yet found a reason to say no to her. Cousin came out onto the landing. When he heard the horses, and his face went through about 6 different things when he saw Clara. Relief, shock, grief cycling back to relief. And he came down the stairs fast, and she got off the horse, carefully with her bad arm, and he took her by the shoulders, and said something I couldn't hear. Then he looked up at me. Clara said something to him. He looked at me again, differently this time. He said, You brought her here? She needed to get here, I said. Those men, if they find out she's alive, they will find out eventually, I said. That is why I brought her today, and not in a week. You have time, but not much of it. The deed papers were taken on the train. If they have not yet been recorded with the territory office, you can file a challenge. He was already nodding, his lawyer's mind working. I know what to do. But how did you? He stopped himself. How can I repay you? I looked at Clara. She was looking at me. She had been looking at me since she got off the horse. "Causes them enough trouble to matter," I said. "I meant to leave then." I had said what needed to be said, and my horse was ready, and my people were 4 days behind me, and there was always something that needed doing. I had been leaving places that were not mine my entire adult life. I knew how to do it. Your eyes on the trail ahead. And you ride and you do not look back, because looking back is not useful, and the trail ahead is where you are. Going, I put my foot in the stirrup. Chayton. Her voice. Behind me, I stopped. I did not turn around for a moment. I stood there with my foot in the stirrup and my hand on the saddle horn and the street noise of Cheyenne going on all around me, and I told myself to mount up and ride, and I did not mount up and ride. I turned around. She had come down the last 2 steps. She was close. She looked up at me. She was not a small woman, but I am tall. And her face was a face that had been thrown from a train and slept on frozen ground, and 4 days through hard country, and was still steady, still clear, still entirely itself. "I'd like to know where your camp is," she said. "This is settled. When I've done what I need to do here, I'd like to know where to find you." I looked at her. "Why?" I said. "To be difficult." I genuinely wanted to know. "Because I want to," she said. "Because there is no one I have trusted more in my life than I trusted you these 4 days. And I know that's not a small thing, and I'm not the kind of woman who forgets a thing like that." She paused. "And because if you ride away right now, I will wonder about that for the rest of my life, and I'm too old to waste time wondering." She was 32. She told me that on the second day when I asked. She did not seem 32. She seemed older, in the way that matters, in experience, in having been tested and having found out what she was made of. "We winter on the Laramie Fork," I said, "east of the canyon. There is a stand of cottonwoods that has a split trunk, very large, you cannot miss it. Ask at the trading post. Birches. The old man will know us." She nodded. "It may not be safe," I said, "coming there, after what has passed. I know. My council will have opinions. I expect they will. It is not a comfortable life." "I grew up on a Missouri farm," she said. Comfortable was never particularly available. I almost smiled again. This time I did not stop it entirely. She reached up and put her hand on my forearm, just for a moment, just her hand, resting there on my sleeve. And she looked up at me, with a steadiness in her face that I have tried to describe to myself many times since and never quite gotten right. It was not gratitude. Gratitude looks away eventually. This did not look away. It was the look of a woman who had made her decision and was letting me see it. Then she stepped back, and I mounted my horse and I rode north. I want to tell you that I rode north and not thinking about my people in the council meeting I had missed and the spring hunt that needed planning. That was true. I thought about all of those things. But I also thought about her hand on my forearm and the way she had said, "I'd like to know where. Find you. Not I'd like to thank you or I'd like to repay you, but where to find you." And the particular difference between those things was something I carried all 4 days back up the Laramie Fork and into the Cottonwood camp, and I did not put it down. She came in the first week of April. I heard the hooves from inside the council lodge where we were arguing about the spring. Boundary and I did not react because I have trained myself not to react to sounds the way some men do. It is not useful in negotiation, but something in my chest said her name before I had thought it. Lakota came to the lodge opening and looked at me, and the left eyebrow went up. I stood. The council watched me stand, which was not usual. I was the chief. I did not stand up in the middle of a meeting without reason. Old Hoxie, who had been on the council since before I was born, and who had opinions about everything, said, "Chayton, give me a moment," I said, and I went outside. She was on a gray horse, not my gray mare, a rented horse probably. It had that agency look, and she was wearing a good coat, new, and her hair was in a braid, and she had a pack tied behind the saddle. That was the pack of someone who had packed carefully and intended to stay. For a while, she saw me, and she did not say anything for a moment. She just sat her horse and looked at me. "The papers," I said. Did you? The recording was challenged and the deed stands in my name. They're facing 3 charges. My cousin says they'll settle. She paused. Done. Good. I brought you something. She reached into the pack and pulled out a folded piece of cloth, heavy, new blanket. I was told by the man at the trading post that you'd given yours to a woman in a canyon and hadn't gotten it back. I looked at the blanket, then at her. Samuel Birch, I said. He has a great deal to say about you. Nothing useful. Most of it useful. She looked out at the camp, the lodges, the horses in the rope corral, the children who had stopped to look at her. Your counsel is in that lodge. Yes, they'll have opinions. They will. She held my eyes. Should I go? I thought about what I would lose if she went. I had been thinking about it, if I was honest, since I rode away from Cheyenne in January. Not obsessively. I did not have time for obsessive, but steadily. The way you think about something that matters. The way it comes back when you are lying awake at 2 in the morning, and the camp is quiet and there is nothing to distract you from the thing you have been not thinking about. No, I said. I reached up and I took the reins of her horse and I held it steady while she stepped down. And when she was on the ground, she was close. She had been close on that Cheyenne street, and she looked up at me the same way she had looked at me then, that decision already made and visible in her face. I said, "The council will ask you questions. I'll answer them. Old Hoxie will not make it easy. I grew up with 4 brothers," she said. "I know how to handle difficult men." I held her eyes for a moment. "Come in," I said. What happened next? The winter that followed, the slow way the band came to know her. Particular morning, she brought Hoxie's wife a remedy for a chest cough that Hoxie himself had been unable to locate, and the way Hoxie looked at me the next day, not quite saying anything, but also saying everything. That is its own story, and I do not have the time for it today. What I have time for is the ceremony, which came in the following autumn. We held it at the cottonwood stand, the one I had described to her, with the split trunk. The whole band was there. Clara stood beside me in a dress that my daughter, who had come from Standing Rock when she heard, who had spent 2 evenings sitting with Clara, and deciding something that I was not privy to, and which had clearly ended in Clara's favor, had made. White elk hide with a pattern of river beads along the hem. Clara stood straight. She always stood straight. It was one of the first things I had noticed about her. The words of the ceremony were Lakota, and she had been learning Lakota for 4 months with the help of my daughter and a ferocious determination that had impressed people who were not easy to impress, and she understood most of them. At the moment when the ceremony required it, she took my hand. Not tentatively, not with ceremony nerves. She took it the way she took everything, directly, decided, having committed to what she was doing, and not going to waste time second, guessing it. I looked down at our hands, then up at her face. She was looking at me. The look was the same one she had given me on the street in Cheyenne, in the canyon firelight. In the saddle on the flat above the Laramie Fork when she'd said I noticed. It was the look of a woman who saw what she was looking at and was not flinching from it, and was not going to flinch. I do not know what she saw. A man who was 44 years old and had been carrying a grief for 2 winters, and had a council that argued with him, and a people that needed things from him every day. A man who was not easy, probably, not comfortable. A man who did not talk unless he had something to say. She kept looking, and she did not let go of my hand. Old Hoxie, standing to my left, made a sound that I will not attempt to describe. My daughter, standing behind Clara, made a different sound, which was much easier to interpret. The ceremony concluded. There is a moment in the evenings when the work of the day is done and the fire is built up, and the camp settles into itself. When I sit outside the lodge and I can hear Clara inside, talking to whoever has come to visit. And people came to visit, more than I expected, more than she expected, because she was the kind of person who drew people once they had gotten over being uncertain. And I sit there and I listen to the sound of her voice, not the words, just the voice, And I think about a canyon floor in the 4th month of winter, and a woman lying half in the water with her pulse in her throat, thin but there. I pulled her off that gravel bar. That is true. I want to be careful not to make more of that than it is. I pulled her off a gravel bar and built a fire and rode 4 days beside her. And I was useful to her, and I was glad to be useful to her. And that is as much of the credit as I will take. What she did, coming back in April, pack tied on a rented horse, and a folded blanket and a look in her face that said she had made her decision. That was hers. Nobody pulled her toward the Laramie Fork. Nobody told her to find the cottonwood with the split trunk. Nobody said to her, "There is a man there who is less alone. When you are near him, go to him." She came because she wanted to, because she had decided. And when a woman like that decides, a woman who has been thrown from a train and lived, who has sat across from hard men and not been moved, packs carefully and stands straight and looks at you without flinching and takes your hand without ceremony nerves. When a woman like that decides you are the one she wants, you pay attention to that. You do not take it lightly. You do not waste it. It is the last evening now, late, the camp long asleep, and the fire has gone to coals and the stars are doing what stars do out here, which is everything, the whole sky full of them from one edge to the other. Clara came out a while ago and sat beside me without asking if I wanted company, because she knows by now that I always want her company, and she doesn't need to ask. She has her blanket around her shoulders. The one she brought me that April day. We share now without discussion about whose it is. And she is leaning against my shoulder and looking at the same sky I am looking at. She said something earlier, just before she got quiet. She said, "I would have died in that canyon." "Yes," I said. "I think about that sometimes." "So do I." She turned her head and looked at me, her face close, and in the coal's light I could see the line of her jaw and the steadiness in her eyes, and she put her hand flat on my chest, her palm over my heart, the way she does sometimes when she wants me to know she is there. Put my hand over hers. That is all. The coals, the sky, her weight against my shoulder. Her hand under mine. I am Chayton, chief of the Broken Bow Band. I have been a lot of things in my life, and I have lost things I should not have had to lose, and I have carried things I did not ask to carry, and I will keep carrying them, because they are mine, and that is what you do. But tonight she is here. Her hand is under mine, and the sky is doing everything it does, every star in its place, cold and steady and as far as you can see. That is enough. That is more than enough.